Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Film Brits podcast. I'm your host Trilby, the Rita Repulsa of film criticism, and let me explain where I've been recently. Yes, I am a couple of weeks behind in doing the Film Brits podcast, and I actually do have a pretty good reason. Now, I was going to start recording during the weekend, last weekend, and then what was happening is that it turned out there were going to be some surprise birthday parties on the other side of the country for numerous members of my girlfriend's family. She's got her stepdad, she had her uncle, and she had her mum, all within a 4-day period, and there was also a surprise party that we were told at the very last minute that we would have to attend, so I was unable to record, and I had to travel to the other side of the country to attend those parties, and of course give my girlfriend a lift and everything in the car, which is absolutely fine and wouldn't have been an issue, because I could have just recorded a couple of days later. However, what happened when I was going to record on the Monday that I came back was that an awful lot of construction work started happening just outside of the flat where myself and my fiancée live. I should say fiancée now, I need to stop saying girlfriend, because that is a thing that happened on New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, that happened. But basically, construction work has been happening right by the window where I record this podcast and all of my other videos, and that construction work happens every weekday and seemingly all day. I have no idea when this construction work stops, but it feels like it goes on from 9 in the morning till 11 PM at night. There's always a lot of beeping, there's always a lot of rummaging with the machinery, there's always a lot of moving and piling and throwing and all of people shouting. They're pulling up a driveway, I think, right next to where I live. It's always very loud. It is right next to where I record, and there's normally good soundproofing in this place just to get all of the noise out from the outside, like wind or people or the occasional ambulance or police siren, but that construction work is incredibly loud. Thankfully, myself and my fiancée we sleep on the other side of the flat where we cannot hear this construction work, but in terms of recording stuff, it's not good. It's not happening during a weekday until this construction work is... I've tried, and it was unlistenable. The podcast, I recorded one a few days ago, it was unlistenable. It was not ideal. It did mean that I was able to get a video out, though, because the time I could have spent doing the podcast, I spent editing a editorial talking about Grand Moff Tintin in Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, in the motor and the motion capture Peter Cushing. That allowed me to get some time done with that, with an editorial and edited video, which hopefully makes up for the wait, but I apologise for the fact that there has not been a lot of Film Brits in January 2017. It's not a great way to start, but it also means that I'm able to just take a little bit of time off, distance myself from recording, and hopefully just get back into it and create some more fresh stuff. And speaking of fresh stuff, let's go to the Share the Love segment. It's this segment of the podcast where I talk about a YouTuber or an online personality that I really, really like, because the internet, as we've seen over the past 2 weeks, is a very, very terrible place, and the world is not a great place at the moment, almost no matter where you live. So I figure that I do a segment like this every single week in every single podcast in order to just share some love to people who I think deserve your attention or deserve your adoration or your praise. And this week it's going to be somebody who I very recently discovered. I only subscribed to his YouTube channel this December just gone. I only recently discovered him, even though he's been doing content for... Well, he's been doing YouTube content for a couple of years, but it's only really the edited content that I really enjoy, the stuff that I've been catching up on over the past year or year and a half, and that is Saberspark. Now, for those of you who don't know, Saberspark is a YouTuber who talks about predominantly about cartoons, about Western animation, stuff like the Disney Channel, Cartoon Network, and also some recent prominent shows such as My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic, as well, and also Gravity Falls and Steven Universe and things like that. And I think he's a brony. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but he did also made a very compelling documentary called Ballad of the Brony, which is a insight into brony culture, which I personally found really, really fascinating. It's an hour-long documentary on his YouTube channel, which is quite interesting. But the stuff that I actually really, really enjoy from his channel, and is the stuff that predominantly drew me to it, was his What Ruined ... series, or What's Ruining ... series. He's done some videos on what ruined the Disney Channel, what's ruining Cartoon Network, and what ruined Nickelodeon. And there's a lot of arguments to be made that shows and programming was a lot better in the 90s or the early 2000s because of nostalgia, because it just felt awesome at the time because we were kids and we were younger and we were filled with boundless optimism and hope, and God, was that misplaced. But I think Saber Spark he makes some really, really compelling arguments as to what happened behind the scenes of these networks and the creators creating content for these networks and these channels, and why they're going in counterintuitive or wrong directions. His video talking about what's ruining Nickelodeon is really, really well researched, really informative, and oddly enough, it would seem that the rise of SpongeBob SquarePants has been what has stagnated Nickelodeon. He's done some really interesting videos, not just about negative stuff, but also just talking about how great series like Steven Universe are, and also how much he just enjoys animation as a whole, talking about whether or not animation should be considered more seriously at the Oscars, and why fandoms can be considered a strong or powerful force in community, why cartoons aimed at younger audiences can also be enjoyed by adults. And he also does a lot of content in terms of YouTube's draconian copyright policy, hashtag WTFU, where's the fair use, the Fine Brothers incident from it was like 10, 11 months ago, that was nearly a year ago, blimey. Basically, he does some really good informative videos, really polished stuff. I love the use of his animated avatar that we see on the screen. I think he just does really, really good videos. And yeah, I really recommend that you check out Saber Spark. He has over 250,000 YouTube subscribers, so he hardly needs the promotion, but he's a YouTube creator that I recently really got into. His recent video was 2 days ago talking about the top 10 worst cartoon intros, and that video reminded me that the But Ugly Martians was a thing that existed and was terrible. So be sure to check out Saber Spark. There are links in the description below where you can check out his content and subscribe to his channel, and tell him that Trilby sent you. So let's talk about the main topics of this podcast, and that is films that I thought were underappreciated in 2016. Now, in terms of my best and worst list of 2016, I'm going to hold off on those for a couple of weeks because I need to catch up on the back catalogue of films that I missed. I'm trying to catch up on some recent releases, like I've recently seen La La Land. What else did I saw? I saw Denial, I saw Trainspotting 2, awesome film by the way, I saw a few others as well, but I'm just trying to catch up on 2016 so I can give a much more comprehensive list of the best and worst films of last year. I still have yet to see The Neon Demon, I need to see Gods of Egypt, Nine Lives, Now You See Me Too. There's a long list of films that I really need to catch up on. And I want to try and make sure that if I'm doing a top 10 list or a top 10 worst list, I need to just have some genuinely great positive films to talk about and also some terrible films to talk about, as opposed to giving a top 10 spot to a 4 out of 5 or 8 out of 10 film, or giving I want to be praising the best of last year, and I don't want to be for example, a film that I gave 3 out of 10 or 1.5 stars out of 5, I don't really want to be putting that on a top 10 worst list, because I'm certain that there's much worse out there from last year that is worthy of scorn and is more deserving to talk about. Unfortunately, last year I just had so much work and so many other commitments in my life that I just had to put watching movies on the back burner, and unfortunately it means that I'm paying for that now because I need to catch up on these films when there's still plenty of films being released in 2017 that I still need to watch as well at the cinema. I still endeavour to write written reviews of everything that I watch, but I'm not making it easy for myself. But let's just talk about some films that I thought were underappreciated in 2016. It is episode 15 of Film Brits, and every time I do an episode that is a multiple of 5, I talk about a top 5. So this one isn't necessarily going to be a top 5. This one is basically just 5 films, or 6, I'll explain in a moment, that in no particular order I think either need reconsideration, ones that I thought did poorly at the box office and deserve to do a lot more, or films that just seem to have been forgotten about, or ones that I think in a few years' time we'll look back on and say we should have appreciated that a little bit more. Now, not let's start with the awkward one first. Let's go for the what, because this one's kind of a tie because they fall into very similar categories, but one of them is clearly better than the other in my opinion. So let's go for the first entry in my top 5 in no particular order most underrated films of 2016. The first lot goes to The Finest Hours, and also Deepwater Horizon. Now these two are big blockbuster-laden spectacles about true stories of heroism, where the second half of the film is all about the spectacle, about the rescue, or about the escape from man-made creations. Now, they're both interesting double features because The Finest Hours takes place in the 1950s. It's the story of Bernie Webber, who was a Coast Guard in Massachusetts, can't pronounce it, who him and a small team of people of the Coast Guard managed to save 32 crewmen from the sinking SS Pendleton. It was during an incredible storm, and it is considered to be the most ambitious and the biggest Coast Guard rescue in American history. And it takes place in a huge thunderstorm, waves crashing, rain everywhere. Whereas Deepwater Horizon is a story about fire. It takes place on the burning Deepwater Horizon oil rig in what year? It was in 2010 when the oil rig Deepwater Horizon exploded, filling the Gulf of Mexico with millions and millions of gallons of oil, and resulted in the deaths of 11 people, whereas in The Finest Hours only one person died. Not that it's a competition or anything. And both are very similar in terms of their ambitions to create, not simplistic, but it's also just, this is the straightforward rescue story. We're not presenting much commentary here, we're not presenting much in the way of characterization, but we want to deliver some spectacle-laden thrills and also some incredibly tense set pieces. When in The Finest Hours, it all culminates in Bernie Webber and his crew of 3 or 4 Coast Guards on this small boat that can only fit a dozen people, able to get themselves and 32 crewmen into this small lifeboat and back home again. It is an incredibly tense sequence. Now, The Finest Hours it has a slightly misleading title. It is just under 2 hours long, and the first hour isn't particularly interesting. It does a good job at setting everything up, but it's not that exciting. It's the second half of The Finest Hours that is worthy of watching. It's not an incredible film. I gave it 3 stars out of 5. But I think I also don't think it's on the same production values level as, say, Gravity or Everest or even Deepwater Horizon. But that second hour is incredibly well done. If you watch the trailer, you can just get an inkling of some of the set pieces that you get in The Finest Hours. And I think that you sort of need these kind of old-fashioned tales of heroism. I think that it's just worth hearing these stories. The Finest Hours is a Disney film, and it kind of does have that sort of old-fashioned Disney simplistic moralising in terms of just being a hero, doing the right thing against all of the odds. But it does it so well, and it's really, really polished as well. The film was a flop at the box office. It didn't make a lot of money, and critics, there was a time when it was in the 30s on Rotten Tomatoes, and I think I can understand why people weren't a huge fan of it, because there's a lot of segments that take place on the coast, at home, away from the storm, involving Bernie Webber's wife, played by Holliday Grainger. And what happens is that she's trying to drive home in a mild snowstorm. She slips off the road and hits a very small bank of snow. And you're thinking, okay, that's not a great situation to be in, but to contrast that with the 30 people on the SS Pendleton while the ship is split in half and is sinking in a thunderstorm and there's no way of hope, and yeah, it doesn't compare. You can't really. It's hard to get invested in the story of what Bernie Webber's wife is doing at home compared to what's happening compared to what's happened to his wife. It's not the ideal solution, and I appreciate having a female influence in a very masculine-driven story. I get that. But it's not great. Now, I'm just looking at the Rotten Tomatoes. There was a time when it was in the 30s when it came out in America. It didn't do great in terms of the critics. But after its international release, that has bumped up to 63, which is more in line with my score, 6 out of 10. So it did okay in terms of the critics, but it was not. It was a box office disappointment for Disney, and they had quite a few of those this year with the BFG, Alice Through the Looking Glass, and Pete's Dragon. But The Finest Hours is the one that just seems to have completely flown under the radar, and I think you should give it a shout. I think you should give it a watch. I'm going to give it a shout out. Deepwater Horizon also was a box office disappointment, but many people do consider it one of the best films of the year. It did a lot better critically, although it seems like Patriots Day from Peter Berg, the same director of Deepwater Horizon, is the one that's getting more of the accolade and more of the attention put upon it, which it comes out in the UK in February 2017. I've not seen Patriots Day yet, although I've heard very mixed things about it. But Deepwater Horizon really should have performed better at the box office. The money is up on screen, and I also like how it kind of became more than just a disaster film at the end, because at the end of the movie you actually see the effects that being on this oil rig had on the people who survived it. Mark Wahlberg's character Mike Williams actually underwent post-traumatic stress disorder at the end of the film, and he's going to be a changed man. And also just showing the people who died over the credits, and some of the people who did survive just have never been out to sea again. It's haunting stuff, and it could have been so easy for Deepwater Horizon to have been a movie about, the dangers of capitalism. This is what happens when money and business and BP, blah, blah, blah. And you've got John Malkovich's character, who plays a BP representative, and it could have been so easy for him to be portrayed as just a guy who was like, no, I don't care about the safety of people, we need the money, 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 we need to drill because money. But what happens is that when they're trying to figure out what's causing the pressure to increase at the base of the oil drill, John Malkovich's character doesn't just say, we need to drill because money, just do it. He actually gets out a whiteboard and makes a very compelling argument and starts drawing diagrams about what he thinks is happening. It turns out he was wrong, but this isn't just a businessman who lets the grunts make him money. He actually has knowledge of the drilling process, and he wants to rationalise the events due to them being way over budget and way behind schedule. It's got a brain in there. Deepwater Horizon is a smart movie, and it doesn't so much call out capitalism as much as it calls out the potential consequences of capitalism. This is a film that talks about the people who capitalism can hurt. It's not an anti-capitalism movie. It's just saying that in order to have this system, a lot of people can potentially get hurt. A lot of people can die. A lot of people can be incredibly negatively affected by your pursuit for these things. It's not an anti-capitalism movie, but it talks about the people that it can hurt when left unchecked. And I think that kind of message and approach was the right way to go for Deepwater Horizon. The production values are brilliant. I think the green screen work, and they built a massive, what scale was it? It was about 80%. They built a huge Deepwater Horizon replica set, which was about 80% of the size of the real thing. They built it in Louisiana. It spent 8 months being built, and the art director Chris Seegers, he did a terrific job. And then the whole thing gets destroyed in less than an hour of screen time, and it is visually arresting stuff. This is a IMAX movie through and through. It is a terrific piece of cinema, and I highly, highly recommend Deepwater Horizon, and to a lesser extent, The Finest Hours. So let's go for a movie that did well. It did well at the box office. It did pretty well. People seem to like it enough. And it's even getting a sequel this time next year. I'm talking about Sony Pictures' Goosebumps. This is a movie that I think people liked it enough. People thought people enjoyed it, and it did well at the box office. But I think we're going to be underestimating Goosebumps. I think this is a movie where we won't really know the full impact about it, the full impact that it had until maybe another 10 or 15 years, where you're probably going to be seeing a lot of upcoming independent horror directors say, yes, I got my start and my love into the horror genre by watching Rob Letterman's Goosebumps. Now, Rob Letterman does not have an incredible recent filmography. He did Gulliver's Travels starring Jack Black, which was not a good film, but this collaboration was much more lucrative for both of them. I think that Jack Black may seem like a really, really strange choice for R.L. Stine, especially when you look at R.L. Stine, who wrote the Goosebumps books, just in case you didn't know. The actual writer is a much more gaunt figure. He's quite slim. He kind of looks a little bit like Peter Cushing should be playing him. But when you get Jack Black, I wasn't a fan of a lot of his comedic stuff in the film, but he actually gave us a multi-layered performance in Goosebumps. Now, it may seem strange to put this in an underrated film of 2016 list, but I think that this film's going to hold up. I think this is going to be something that we're going to reevaluate in a couple of years' time and think, you know what, we underestimated this film. The sequel's going to come out next year, hopefully be pretty good. I think that what it did was that it aimed its crosshairs squarely at the 10-year-old boy demographic, and it hit bullseye. The movie, much like Deepwater Horizon, has got a pretty slow start, and I think its attempts at drama, because there's a twist concerning R.L. Stine's daughter in the film that really, really should have been explored and was just given no time at all to be fleshed out. But I think that this movie could have so easily have just been a Sony picture where they just slap on the Goosebumps brand recognition and just call it a day. But Rob Letterman and not R.L. Stine, Jack Black, they really came together to do something a lot of fun. The action beats are really entertaining. I really like Slappy the Dummy as a villain. The sequel hook at the end is something that I genuinely do want to see explored, and hopefully they do go with that approach in the sequel next year. And it's an affectionate pastiche of 90s family films. This does feel like a reasonable follow-up to, say, Jumanji, possibly even more so than the Jumanji film that we're getting this year. Does Jumanji come out this year? Let me take a look at that. But yeah, if Goosebumps kind of does take a Jumanji approach where let's throw the kitchen sink and everything else at the screen, because Goosebumps is a movie about the Goosebumps legacy and about the characters from the books apparently being real, and then all of them get unleashed onto this small suburban town that we've seen out of hundreds and hundreds of 90s children's films. I can't talk. And in that regard, it is an affectionate pastiche. It pays homage to the 90s family-friendly horror films, and it brings back a bit of a dead genre. It's not so often that we see live-action children's films, and Goosebumps was one of the best. Now I'm just looking at the Jumanji release date, and yeah, it comes out December 22nd, 2017. That release date may be different for UK audiences. That's the American release date with it stars Dwayne Johnson, Karen Gillan, Kevin Hart, and also Jack Black. It feels like we don't really need a Jumanji 2 because we got Goosebumps, and that's quite a decent substitute in my opinion. Okay, so the UK release date for Jumanji, or Jumanji 2, whatever they end up calling it, is December 29th. 2017. So in less than a year's time, we're going to know how this pans out. But I think Goosebumps is a film that we're currently underestimating the lasting legacy for. I think some of the practical effects are solid in the film. I like the homage to the thriller-style zombies. The CGI, it's going for the cartoony, family-friendly approach, but it works well. I think especially the garden gnomes, they are CGI characters, but they look like they are really interacting with the characters. I think that the direction is solid. I think Danny Elfman's music is exactly what you'd expect from a Danny Elfman Goosebumps score, and yeah, it's a solid family-friendly horror film. You hardly get those nowadays, and I think we should appreciate it when we do get them, and I think Goosebumps does it does well enough. I think it is a very solid film, and I think it deserves some reevaluation. Now, the next one is a very personal pick of mine. This is a film that I'm possibly overstating the quality of. I'll be completely upfront about that. I think that what it did was that it took aspects that I love about storytelling and subject matter that resonates with me personally, and I may be overstating it, but the next slot in my most underrated films of 2016 is Trumbo. Now, Trumbo came out in 2015. outside of America, but I'm going for the UK release dates. And Trumbo is genuinely one of my favourite films of 2016. For those of you who don't know, Trumbo is a biopic about Dalton Trumbo, the screenwriter in Hollywood, who in the 1950s was part of the Hollywood blacklist. Now, the Hollywood blacklist was brought upon people through... There was the threat of communism, basically. In the late 40s, there was an investigation on communism being an influence in Hollywood and the motion picture industry. So numerous people were blacklisted for being either suspected communists or communist sympathizers, and it was a massive freedom of speech issue, but it was just overlooked. Freedom of speech was completely overlooked because there was this Cold War communist paranoia that was dominating America. And what happened was that Dalton Trumbo, he organised the Hollywood 10, where these 10 prominent Hollywood screenwriters would continue making screenplays for companies, and they would take their names off the screenplay, use different screen names, or they would sell the scripts to other writers who would then put their names on it, and then they would take a cut of the funding. I'm probably doing a terrible job explaining it because it's Saturday night and I'm tired, but it's an incredibly relevant story about because we live in a weird time. We live in a really, really weird time where people they love to encroach. They just love to encroach about free speech and talk about how they're being censored and how much censorship is happening. But they completely fail to grasp what free speech is and what censorship actually is, so that when we get a film like Trumbo, where it talks about what genuine censorship and what genuine anti-free speech is, it kind of puts things into more perspective. And we also have just a great main character at its centre. Dalton Trumbo, played brilliantly by Bryan Cranston, who was Oscar nominated for the film. I don't think he should have won, but he was very deserving of the nomination. He's essentially playing a big cartoon character, but then when you watch interviews with the real Dalton Trumbo, when you see pictures of him in the bath with a typewriter and his distinctive moustache, he is essentially a real-life cartoon character, and Bryan Cranston accurately portrays him. We've got Diane Lane and Helen Mirren giving great performances. Louis C.K. in one of his rare dramatic roles. He's a great comedian, but he's also great dramatically in this film. John Goodman is a lot of fun. John Goodman plays I can't remember who did he play. He plays Frank King, who started up a film production company. What was it called? So I'm just looking on Wikipedia, which probably isn't the greatest thing to be doing during a podcast, but essentially the King Brothers production, that's it. John Goodman plays one of the brothers, Frank King, who was making trash B movies on a low budget. And there's a great scene where one of the government agents comes to King Brothers Productions and says, "Right, we know what you're doing. We know that Dalton Trumbo is writing screenplays for you. You have to fire him." And what happens is that, it's in the trailer, so it's not really much of a spoiler, but John Goodman's character takes out a baseball bat and starts threatening him and smashing up his office, and he holds him against the wall, and he says, I make garbage, I'm in this for the money and the pussy, and they're both falling from the trees. And he's just completely, unfettered by this, these threats of intimidation. He knows he makes garbage, and he's got an Oscar-nominated screenwriter working for him, and he doesn't care. It's a great supporting turn. John Goodman has had a really good year last year. Can we just talk about that? John Goodman, what was he in? He was in 10 Cloverfield Lane. He was in Trumbo. He's apparently really good in Patriots Day, but of course I've not seen that yet. And of course he's also going to be in Kong Skull Island. I'm looking forward to seeing what he does there. We need to give this guy an Oscar, just a Lifetime Achievement Award or something. The guy's awesome. But Trumbo talks. It shows Dalton Trumbo's time as one of the Hollywood 10, and also him writing screenplays for Spartacus and Exodus while being blacklisted. And I just love movies about making movies, so that's why this is very a very personal pick for me. I don't think many people have seen it. It didn't make a lot of money at the box office. This was more of an awards contender film, something that could be made at a slight loss in order to try and get some awards prestige and some publicity. But it's an incredibly strong film. I think that it's not just the fact that it happens to push my buttons. I just think it's a really, really great and relevant political biopic drama. I think that Jay Roach, who is a very political filmmaker, believe it or not, I think he was a really good choice to direct Trumbo. I think Bryan Cranston was a terrific choice. I think that the story it's telling needs to be heard about, and I think that it's just a great example of documenting an issue that Hollywood should be ashamed about. I think that Hollywood are highly, highly embarrassed about the blacklist of the 1940s and the 1950s, and this movie just lays it bare for them. And I think that it really, really should be seen a lot more. I think that more people need to watch Trumbo, and it is genuinely one of my favourite films of 2016, and it will be making my top 10 list, unless something that I see as I catch up on last year's releases happens to bump it off the list, but at the moment that's not looking very likely. So the next film is another underrated biopic that not many people saw, but I think even less people saw this. This was a massive box office flop. It's Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. Now, this is a film starring Tina Fey as television journalist Kim Baker, who is assigned to work as a war correspondent in Afghanistan during the mid-2000s. And she's planned to stay in Afghanistan for a couple of months, but she stays there. She stays there for years. I can't remember exactly how long she spends there, but it's based off of Kim Baker's memoirs called The Taliban Shuffle: Strange Days in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And when you're talking about the war on terror and also the Middle Eastern conflicts and America's involvement in it, it feels like every story possible has been told from that period. But Whiskey Tango Foxtrot tells a very different side of it, more about the journalists who went over there to cover war, and how many of them, especially Kim Baker, who wrote the memoir and is played by Tina Fey in this film, how you can get addicted to the danger of war correspondence, how you can how it becomes kind of like a dangerous high, wanting to get out there and cover these conflicts because the adrenaline is so potent and it affects you so much. It's a very interesting approach to take to the subject, and I think that it could have worked maybe better as a 10-episode Netflix series or something. I think that maybe it needed a bit more time, because Kim Baker spent years in Afghanistan working as a war correspondent. I think that the material is there for her to star in like a 10-episode Netflix series, or maybe like a 13-episode network series or something. I think the material is there, and I think Whiskey Tango Foxtrot has a very episodic structure which hampers it somewhat. I think it would have been nice if we spent a lot more time with like Martin Freeman's character in the film, or Margot Robbie, because what happens is that Tina Fey and Margot Robbie's characters are meant to be very good friends, but they don't spend a lot of time together. I think that they should have had a lot more screen time with each other, and a Netflix series, or because a TV series in general with maybe 4 or 5 times the length could have helped to give these people who are working on the same side kind of like a sense of camaraderie, as well as maybe expanding on her relationship with the generals and the colonels that regularly take her out on their missions in order to film and document them. But it's a strong comedy. I think there's some really good laughs. Many of them are in the trailer, but there's still a lot of interesting ideas in Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. This was not a successful film at the box office. It cost $35 million to make, and it only took in $25 million at the box office, which, and of course that $35 million budget does not include distribution and marketing, and of course the movie theatres took a cut of that $25 million as well. So it was quite a significant box office bomb. But I think that it was playing with some really interesting ideas. I think the performances are strong. I love almost anything that Tina Fey is in. I think she's a terrific comedian, a terrific performer. And I think if you feel like the war on terror or the conflict in the Middle East and Afghanistan and Pakistan, if you think that you've seen everything that there is to see about those, or if you're just sick of war, you're just sick of combat-laden war films, then I think Whiskey Tango Foxtrot is a slight hidden gem that you should check out. I think it's a solid film, and of course let's just not forget the scene in the trailer where she's reporting on one of the first female drivers in one of these countries. Can't remember which one it is. And in the background, the woman driving the car just reverses and hits a brick wall or hits something, and then she just turns around and says, "Yep, that sucks. That sucks for women." It's Tina Fey's feminist credentials are firmly on her sleeve in this film. She produced the film and starred in it, of course, and clearly her influence over the approach the film takes in the black comedy it's on display, but it gives it's an interesting viewpoint. It's an interesting story, and Kim Baker's actual memoirs, The Taliban Shuffle, is a very interesting read. I think you should check it out. Now, the final film that I'll be talking about in terms of the most underrated movies of 2016 is the one, the only, Ghostbusters 2016. Now, if you didn't like the film, absolutely fine. I will come right up front and say that I completely understand many of the criticisms levelled at Ghostbusters 2016, Paul Feig's Ghostbusters, because Paul Feig's brand of comedy is an acquired taste. What he likes to do is he likes to have a great relationship with his cast, and he trusts them to just bring a lot of improvisational material onto set and just roll with it and film hundreds of hours of footage with different alternative jokes and alternative takes and try and put it together into something cohesive and enjoyable. And I completely understand that people maybe enjoyed the dry humour of the original Ghostbusters and the wit a lot more than the SNL-inspired improvisational comedy approach of this Ghostbusters. I completely get it. And I think if you enjoyed Bridesmaids, or if you enjoyed The Heat, or any other Paul Feig films, then you'll feel right at home at Ghostbusters. But when you have people who say this was the worst film of 2016, or they have it on their top 10 worst lists, part of me thinks that you really, really need to have some perspective. And I think if you hate Ghostbusters to that extent, because let's not forget there was a massive backlash against this film based on its initial announcements. The sexist backlash did not start at the trailer, let's not forget. The original, was it The Hollywood Reporter? I actually put a link to it in my review. It was, The Hollywood Reporter. There's a news story where they talk about the initial announcement for the Ghostbusters reveal, like the initial news that Paul Feig was going to be making a Ghostbusters movie with an all-female cast. You go into that comment section and it is laden with sexist, misogynistic comments. This was not a case of the trailer looks terrible, so let's have a backlash. There was seeds planted a lot earlier there. And obviously, if you did not like the film, that does not make you a sexist, that does not make you a misogynist. But if you hated the film to the extent that you were just consistently campaigning against it, consistently making videos about it, there are people on YouTube still making anti-Ghostbusters videos to this day. When Independence Day Resurgence came out last year and was a soulless cash grab sequel with no business being the way it was, Ghostbusters stands head and shoulders way above Independence Day Resurgence. If this was just about the quality of the film, then it probably wouldn't be making many worst of lists. It probably wouldn't be making any, because its heart is in the right place. It feels like these people making the film enjoyed and wanted to make something really worthwhile. It's got Paul Feig's comedy fingerprints all over it. So yes, I understand if you don't like his brand of comedy, but that is a completely subjective thing. Like, for example, I'm not going to be putting David Brent's Life on the Road in my top 10 worst films list of 2016 just because I am not a fan of Ricky Gervais's David Brent style of comedy. That's just not going to happen, because I just understand the completely subjective disconnect between myself and his brand of humour. I get that completely. And I think that the new Ghostbusters is even better than Ghostbusters 2 was. I think it's more deserving of the Ghostbusters brand name and the iconography than Ghostbusters 2 was. I'm just going to come right out and say it. And I'll also say that I think the extended edition of Ghostbusters actually brings the film down in my eyes, because as much as I do enjoy and agree with Paul Feig's brand of comedy, it doesn't have as much staying power, because the extended cut adds about 15 to 20 minutes to the film, and that actually does drag it down. I think Paul Feig's comedy works in much smaller doses than the extended cut has, and I think the theatrical version is the way to go. That is the way to watch the movie, in my opinion. And when you've got characters like Holtzman and Kevin, just these are great comedic performances. I think last year was like the big Kate McKinnon breakout year, and her performance as Holtzman, she's one of my favourite Ghostbusters period, and that's also taking into account all the male Ghostbusters from the original series. I think if I was going to be doing a top 4 Ghostbusters, Holtzman would be in that top 4. I think she might even be in the top 3 or the top 2. She is terrific in the film. I love Kevin as well. Like the scene when he's trying to show trying to find out which modelling headshot he should use. Me playing saxophone or me listening to saxophone. He's like, me and my girlfriend watched the fiance. She was my girlfriend at the time. We watched the film. She was in tears of laughter at Kevin's like introductory scene. Tears of laughter. It's obviously if you're not a fan of the brand of comedy, that's absolutely fine. But it's like some people really enjoyed this film. I'm one of them. And when you just get these people who, when the cast visited a hospital to cheer up some of the terminally ill people it was at the medical centre in Boston, and then the Facebook page of the medical centre was just bombarded with misogynistic comments. And this wasn't just, oh, Ghostbusters sucks. This was genuine misogynistic comments when they're there to entertain and look after sick children. Like, maybe the problem is not the movie. I don't know. It's just so strange that out of all of the terrible films that came out last year, or all of the films in general, all of a sudden let's just start talking about Ghostbusters. I don't know. And when people say that Sony baited them or that Sony capitalised on it, let's not forget that they had to capitalise on something that was already happening. They had to... that was in response to something. That they didn't start it to try and not... we're not going to be doing the whole they started it, miss. No, sir, they started it. But no, they didn't start it. This is like, you can use the internet as a wayback machine. You can look back in time. You can see that they literally did not start it. And I think that its heart is in the right place. It's got a lot of real emotion and narrative heft in the new Ghostbusters film, when they talk about people who feel ostracised and how they find common ground in each other. I think that Holtzman's hero scene towards the end of the film in Times Square is just one of the most epic moments of 2016. I think that, yeah, the CGI effects aren't as good as they should be, because Paul Feig is not a great technical filmmaker. I think maybe they should have gotten a better first AD, or maybe somebody who was maybe more technically proficient for a Ghostbusters film. And it does rely on the iconography of the original film a bit too much, even though there are some really fun callbacks. Like Bill Murray was really fun in the film. And I also like Sigourney Weaver's cameo towards the end. But yeah, I think that it's been embraced by a younger audience. I think kids really enjoy it. Its heart was completely in the right place, and it's so much better than some cash grab sequels that came out last year, like Independence Day Resurgence or Alice Through the Looking Glass, or Suicide Squad. If you consider Ghostbusters to be worse than Suicide Squad, then get your head on straight, buddy. But yeah, so Ghostbusters, for basically me say, if I were to even give it 1 star, I would be saying that it was an underrated film. That's basically the level of backlash that is still happening to this day. There are still people on YouTube who are just continually just bitching about Ghostbusters 2016. It's not likely to get a sequel, although I would be more than happy to see one with this creative team. Hopefully they don't do that post-credits concept that they teased at the end of the film. But this is a film I bought on Blu-ray. I enjoyed the extended cut, but not to the extent that I enjoyed the original cut. This is an enjoyable film. It was one of the better legacy sequels or remakes that came out in 2016, and it is one of the most underrated movies of 2016 in my opinion. Okay, so that's my top 5 most underrated movies of 2016. We've got Deepwater Horizon, tied with The Finest Hours. We've got Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, Ghostbusters, Goosebumps, and Trumbo. So those are kind of my top 6, although I think that Deepwater Horizon and The Finest Hours are very, very similar films, although Deepwater Horizon is heads and shoulders much better than The Finest Hours in my opinion. So let's go to my Patreon questions. Now, I'd like to thank my patrons for helping to keep the lights on here, just on Trilby Reviews in general, and mainly for the Film Brits podcast. Basically, if you'd like to help support my content, both the podcast and also my written and video contents, then please be sure to pledge to my Patreon at www.patreon.com/Trilby, where you'll get the podcast a day early, you'll get an MP3 download of it, you'll get exclusive access to my blogs, and also just me talking about stuff in the Patreons, and like only patrons get to see. You'll get your name in the credits of any Patreon content that I do video wise, and you can also become a sponsor of the Film Brits podcast. There's a couple of you who are actually pledging above, equal or above the sponsor or producer of the Film Brits podcast, and I've reached out to you, and some of you have even said, I don't want to be a sponsor or a producer, I just want to support you, which is, I hugely appreciate it. And I don't quite know how to approach that, but if you want me to give your website or your blog or your business or anything a shout out, or take a look, just let me know, because you are paying above, you are paying to be a producer or a sponsor of the Film Brits podcast, and you're, I hugely appreciate your generosity, but I feel like you could be getting more out of it, but that's just me. So I'm going to be taking some questions from my patrons, where I'll be giving hopefully some comprehensive or in-depth answers. And also some of these people are just responding to, when I told them that I was doing a top 5 most underrated films of 2016, they chimed in. Some of them just actually posted just their top 5 best. For example, Dean Jones. He's Sir Dean Jones, because a couple of episodes ago I knighted him. So Sir Dean Jones of Film Brits says, I need to go and see a few more films before doing my definitive list. So my top 5 in no particular order goes to Sing Street, Captain America Civil War, Deepwater Horizon, Don't Breathe, and The Nice Guys. That's a very awesome list. That's a really good list of top 5. It doesn't look like it's an underrated list, but that gives top 5 in general. That's a really good list of films. Some of those, there's not a bad, all of those are at least great films. All of those are great films, so that's a really good top 5 list, really solid, and props for seeing Sing Street and The Nice Guys. Those films did not get the box office love that they deserved. So Dean Jones's question is, what is the future of your channels, Mr. TARDIS Reviews, Trouble Reviews, and Trouble Gaming, in terms of content? For example, the Doctor Who reviews and your cliffhanger from your Sherlock the Great Game review is yet to be resolved. Blimey, that was like 5 years ago. Hashtag Mr. Trouble TARDIS fans remember. So yeah, like I said, last year was a difficult year in terms of getting channels, getting content on the channels. It started off great for the first 3 months where I was doing Trouble Reviews, audio reviews, and content and everything like that. But then that all changed when me and my fiance moved in together. Now, don't say, oh, Trouble's fiance ruined Mr. TARDIS or ruined Trouble Reviews or whatever. That's not the case. What happened was that as soon as we moved in together, I started getting a lot of work. I started working in the media industry a lot more frequently because, of course, I've got to pay the bills. I've got to pay rent. I've got to pay for general maintenance and living and eating and stuff like that, which has got to be done when you are an adult. Because, yeah, and when you work in the media industry, you do not work a 9-to-5 job. You work a 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. job. You work incredibly antisocial hours. You work hours where you cannot simply just go to the movie theatre after work because it is bloody midnight and no movie theatres are open, unless it's a midnight screening. But, you're going to be too late to attend the midnight screening because it starts at midnight and you finish after midnight. And it's difficult to get a spare hour to start editing. It's difficult to get a spare hour to record a podcast or do a review and things like that. And what happens is that because working in the media industry, most of the time you are working Monday to Friday, which means, you've got the weekends off to do stuff. But because you work such long hours during the weekday, during the weekend, you have to catch up and do stuff. You have to do stuff that you couldn't do when you were working during the weekday. You've got to do the washing. You've got to, make sure all of your finances are in order. You've got to pay bills. You've got to sort all of this out. You've got to clean. You've got to maintain your living space. You've got to do all of that. It just meant that I couldn't put the channel or put my website first. It meant that I was working my way up to my dream job, and that was awesome. And I was part of the I'm still am working as a part in the media industry. But it means that I was unable to actually talk about the media because I was too busy helping to make it, which is awesome, but it's not so great for you folks. Because of when people say, "Oh, you've not created a video for months. You are so lazy," and they call me lazy when I'm getting up at 6 a.m, coming home at midnight in order to work all of that time and to pay the bills. It's difficult, and my channel, all of my channels are at the awkward space where I have enough fans and followers to have I've got a dedicated and awesome following of people, but I don't have enough where I'm able to earn a complete living from it, and I can abandon everything and just do 9 to 5 full-time work on my YouTube channel or on my website. I'm just not able to do that. The audience isn't big enough, which is fair enough, it's fine. But it also means that if they say, oh, Will, we want you working on set for a day, here's your wage, go do it for a day, I'm going to pick that over, let's start doing a video that will only get me a couple of dollars on YouTube ad revenue. Like, you've got to make those decisions. What I was hoping to do was to do a lot more frequent editorials and in-depth video reviews, but the work unfortunately just had to come first. As for Doctor Who stuff, it doesn't help that Doctor Who has not been great recently, so my heart's not as in it in terms of prioritising doing Doctor Who related content. But it also is the fact that when I'm also trying to do movie reviews, I need to prioritise seeing recent releases to be as topical as possible, as opposed to reviewing Doctor Who stories that are 2 or 3 years old. It's kind of like a hole that I dug myself, but that's the situation that I'm in. As for Trilby Gaming, I started late 2015 or 2016. I recorded hours of Let's Play footage that is on my laptop, half edited, but I just not had the time to finish it. I have hours of Let's Play content, me playing games like Limbo, Crazy Taxi, the Walking Dead game, This War of Mine. I've got loads of content that is just I've not finished editing, and I've just not had the time to go back to it, which is really frustrating because I was hoping 2016 would be the return of Trilby Gaming. I said on, was it Twitter or Facebook, either or, and I just wasn't able to do it. It's frustrating because it's I started my channel when I was a university student. When I was it was just before I started university, and I had a lot more free time. I had a lot less responsibilities, and I didn't have to pay bills. I was able to do a lot more in terms of focusing on my hobbies. But then when I started having to live independently, I had to prioritise earning a wage. I had to prioritise getting proper work, quote unquote, get a real job as opposed to YouTube stuff. And it's frustrating because I love my online content. I love writing it. I love editing videos. I love communicating with you guys. I love doing this podcast. I love all of it. But it's got to it has to come at the expense of being able to be an adult and have real life responsibilities. And I've also got a fiance, I've got a girlfriend who I need to spend time with. I've got friends and families who I can't really lose contact with. I need to make sure that I see them on a semi-regular basis. It's just all of these real life factors that are boring, but that's kind of how it goes. As for the cliffhanger for Sherlock the Great Game, I had a plan to resolve that in that the TARDIS bin would be involved in it, and I can't remember exactly what was going to happen, because by the time I was getting ready to start reviewing, was it A Scandal in Belgravia, I had moved accommodation. I'd moved somewhere else, so I would have to have explained how did I move location for the cliffhanger resolution, and that was going to play a role in it, but I can't remember exactly what it was. So it's frustrating. I completely understand why people miss the Doctor Who. I miss the Doctor Who. I miss it just as much as you folks do. As for the future, I try. I can't promise anything, but I try really hard to make it work. So I'm going to keep trying in 2017, and hopefully it's going to pan out better. Who knows? But just rest assured that I do try. So the next question comes from Edward Sweet, who says, my favourite film of 2016 was Nicholas Winding Refn's The Neon Demon. While not to everyone's taste, I thought it was a fantastic film and a great mix of art house and grindhouse cinema. Worth watching for the dazzling cinematography and Cliff Martinez's chilling synth score. My second and third favourites from 2016 were The Hateful Eight and Kubo and the Two Strings. Now, I was debating whether or not to put Kubo and the Two Strings in my top 10 underrated because it didn't do great at the box office, but it seems like everybody who watched it absolutely adored and loved it, so I couldn't really call it underrated. But those are... I've not seen The Neon Demon. That is a catch-up film for me. But The Hateful Eight, while it was a bit too long, that film did not need to be nearly 3 hours long. But it was a really, really fun, enjoyable bottle movie where most of it just takes place in one location. It was really, really well done, and Tarantino was just an awesome filmmaker, and yeah, I loved Kubo and the Two Strings. So yeah, Neon Demon, Hateful Eight, and Kubo and the Two Strings are Edward Sweeter's favourite films of last year. And George says, one 2016 release I felt was severely overlooked and wanted to share is the French animated film Long Way North. I thought it was a beautiful animated film with a simple but engaging story, likeable characters, and a gorgeous hand-drawn painting-like art style. The director, Remy Che, was previously involved in the animation of the equally amazing animated film The Secret of Kells, which was made by the studio who made Song of the Sea. I think it's definitely worth a look if you haven't seen it already. It's not up to the peak of quality as Song of the Sea or The Secret of Kells, but I really enjoyed this film. Other overlooked 2016 films I wish to highlight are Eddie the Eagle, Kubo and the Two Strings, The Shallows, and The Little Prince. That last one is Netflix exclusive, but it was released in English this year, and I felt it was worth mentioning. So yeah, Long Way North is a film that I'd never heard of until this Patreon comment, George. So I've got to try and find a way to watch this thing, because I've seen pictures and trailers. It looks gorgeous. I guess I'm not quite sure how I'd watch it. It is French. It is a French film. I think you can import the DVD. I think you can also download it on Amazon Instant. I don't know if that's the English version or if it's the French version or if there is an English version. But I think I'm going to have to check that one out, especially if it comes from a director who had done animation on Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea. Song of the Sea is amazing, by the way. It made my top 10 best list of 2015. It made my top 15 of 2015. Song of the Sea was awesome. Eddie the Eagle, a lot of fun. Really enjoyed that one. Kubo and the Two Strings, don't need to say much more. The Shallows was a great schlocky B movie, and I absolutely loved it. And The Little Prince is a film that I really want to check out because I really enjoyed the story. I think that the book is really charming, and I've been meaning to check out the Netflix film. Or it's not a Netflix film, but it got a lot of distribution through Netflix because of release doohickeys and everything. So that is all of the Patreon questions. Well, there was only really one question. The rest of them were just drawing attention to film. So if you've not seen The Neon Demon or Long Way North or the Little Prince or Eddie the Eagle or Kubo and the Two Strings or Sing Street, those are films. There were a lot of underappreciated films from last year. Go check those out. Many of them are on Netflix. I think Sing Street is on Netflix as well. Like, there's no excuse, guys. Go check it out and watch it. Now, let's go to what is some of you's people's favourite and also some of you's people's least favourite segments. The lightning round, where basically I take to Twitter to answer questions and I have 60 seconds to answer them. So let's go to... I've not looked or seen or looked at any of these questions. Can't get the words out. It's getting to that time in the podcast where I'm struggling to talk. So let's take these questions. Let me just scroll down to get to the beginning of them. Okay. Right. 3, 2, 1, go. Leighton Sowell asks, which one are you most looking forward to out of Justice League and Avengers Infinity War? It's Avengers Infinity War. It's no question here. With Suicide Squad and Batman v Superman, it just feels like the DCEU is just not on track. And Justice League, I'm hopeful, but I just feel like I'm gonna be so trepidatious up until the moment I see it, and then based on how it turns out, I'll either like it, hate it, or just be incredibly indifferent to it, or nuances in between, because believe it or not, nuance does exist. But I think Avengers Infinity War is I'm the most optimistic about it. I'm most looking forward to it because it's going to feel like the culmination of so many aspects. There's not really a lot set up in terms of character going into Justice League apart from Superman is dead, what do we do now? Whereas Avengers Infinity War has so much character stuff to resolve after the events of Civil War that it's going to be interesting to see how it all pays off or how it evolves to span out into future sequels or into future films. So that was 60 seconds exactly. So next question, Dean Jones again. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. What have I done? I've messed up the timer. Let's start again. 3, 2, 1, go. Dean Jones says, with the sad passing of John Hurt, a favourite role of his and why? I was lucky enough to meet the man himself in 2014, and attached to the tweet is a picture of his signed Day of the Doctor anniversary Doctor Who DVD signed by John Hurt, which has just quadrupled in value if you were to put it on eBay. Obviously, I'm kidding, kind of. But yeah, John Hurt's passing, that was That one hurt a lot. I'm not saying that as a pun. That was an accidental pun that I said on Twitter earlier, on Facebook earlier, sorry. But John Hurt, genuinely one of the best character actors of all time. He's kind of the guy, he looked like he was 70 years old 30 years ago, but he was still able to just have so much energy and just he's so good in almost everything. Even some of the bad films, he's just great in them. But in terms of favourite performance, I'm probably going to go over 60 seconds because I rambled. But I love him in Doctor Who, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a Doctor Who fan, but he's genuinely terrific in that, and he's playing a great character. But it's got to be The Elephant Man. I think David Lynch's Elephant Man, it's one of his best films, but it's John Hurt's. Even though he was just caked in makeup and prosthetics, he was just incredibly powerful in that film. Just his facial expressions, the eyes, the voice, it's an incredible performance, and one of the world's best actors did leave us today, and he will be missed. So that was over 60 seconds, but it's John Hurt. We're gonna have just give him a break there. Right, so let's go to next question. 3, 2, 1, go. Zoe Jones asks, if there were to be a fourth Cornetto film, what genre would you want it to be based off, and why? That's a really good question. The thing about the Cornetto films is that they're not really based off genres as much as subgenres. Like Shaun of the Dead is zombie horror films. With Hot Fuzz, it's cop action films. With The World's End, it's alien invasion science fiction stories. So you've got to find a genre that's not been done before, and then find a subgenre under that genre. So let's go for romance. Yeah, I'd love to see an Edgar Wright romance film, because I actually really appreciated the love story in Shaun of the Dead. I think that was very subtle but very well handled. So what romance subgenres are there? Trying to think of like non-pornographic romance subgenres, but I think Edgar Wright doing a romance film would be really good. Like, it would be lower budget, of course, and not have great spectacle, but I think that would be a good approach. I think he has the screenplay charms, the screenplay muscles to pull it off. So that was slightly over 60, but I stammered, so it's okay. Right, next question. 3, 2, 1, go. Ollie the Who fan, you previously mentioned that you're not a fan of Titanic. Can you briefly explain why? Now, let me just stress, in Titanic there is roughly a 40 or 50 minute period of Titanic where it is basically perfect, and that is the sinking of the ship. James Cameron's technical abilities are almost unparalleled. It's just an incredible use of practical sets, like massive sound stages just filled with water, and great CGI that was ahead of its time. I think that the sinking sequence in Titanic is spectacular, masterful filmmaking. However, I think that the romance around it is superfluous. I think it was a big mistake to pick a fictional love story, which kind of comes at the expense of a real-life tragedy that happened. I think that what we need to remember from Titanic is that it was not a love story, it was a story of hubris, and I think while it probably wouldn't have made nearly as much money, it would have been a much better film if it was a disaster movie first. And also the fact that they portrayed Kathy Bates' character as a comedic fool, even though she did some very heroic things on the Titanic, and also there was that captain who shot somebody and then shot themselves, even though they didn't even do that in real life, and James Cameron had to apologise to the hometown where he came from because it was portrayed so poorly. Over 60 seconds, but I kind of had to explain myself. So, okay, I need to stick to 6 seconds, gotta make this work. Okay, next question. 3, 2, 1, go. Bob Jenkins asks, what are your favourite films from the 90s? Off the top of my head, it's gotta be Terminator 2. Terminator 2 is one of my favourite movies of all time. It is, like, in my top 3. No particular reason for why it is a 90s film. There's no 90s stuff attached to it, really. Like, Trainspotting is a very 90s film, but Terminator 2 is just... It is my favourite film from the 90s. It is one of the best science fiction movies of all time, one of the best sequels of all time. Superb performances, amazing action set pieces, great special effects. Once again, like James Cameron is an incredible technical filmmaker. He does amazing work. Terminator 2 is one of the best movies of all time. Okay, so, next question. 3, 2, 1, go. Nick Brent asks, might be too late, but favourite Wes Anderson movie? Nick Brent, you are not too late. As for Wes Anderson, I do love Fantastic Mr. Fox. I think that is such a Wes Anderson film, but he's able to still get the spirit of Roald Dahl's dialogue and his story in there. I think it's really, really a really great collaboration between the two. Just thinking of other ones, like I enjoy Grand Budapest Hotel, Royal Tenenbaums, Life Aquatic. I think these are really good films, but I keep going back to Fantastic Mr. Fox. I think it's... Yeah, I think that's my favourite film of his. I think that it's taking, like, he's a very original filmmaker, but I think when you get someone like Roald Dahl to give him the basis to work off of, and then he just builds upon those foundations, I think Wes Anderson should maybe adapt films a bit more. I know he's a very original guy, but I think adaptations, he could really, really shine in that field. Okay, so next question, let's just scroll up. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. Tom Monty asks, do you think Capaldi will regenerate at the end of Series 10 of Doctor Who? If not, when? And do you want it to happen sooner or later? I would like to see what Capaldi does with Chris Chibnall. I hope he doesn't regenerate at the end of the series, even though it might take a while for Chris Chibnall to be able to build from the ground up a Doctor that that is completely his, because he'll be inheriting a Stephen Moffat Doctor, which is not great creatively, but I want to see what Capaldi does with the Chibnall script. I want to see what Capaldi does because Chibnall has really grown as a writer since his time being away from Doctor Who. Like, Broadchurch has just proved he's really, really grown as a writer and as a creator. And Capaldi is a terrific actor who has just been wasted on these scripts in the past few years. I just want him to be able to really get his teeth into something really powerful, really layered and textual, and I think that Chibnall will be able to do that. So I think Capaldi might regenerate at the end of the next series, but if he doesn't, I really hope that he does stay with Chibnall for a little bit. Okay, so next question. Okay, next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Luke Jenkins asks, how do you feel The World's End compares against the other two of the Cornetto trilogy? So I did a very in-depth podcast with Trey from the Movie Mania podcast about the Cornetto trilogy. I think was Bandit there as well. He might have been off that week, talking about Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and The World's End. And the way I see it is that Shaun of the Dead is my favourite, Hot Fuzz is the funniest, and The World's End is the best. I think it's got the most on its mind. I think it's the most mature. I think it's the most in-depth and detailed. I think it's the smartest script. I rated it quite comparatively low when I first watched it. I think I gave it like a 7 out of 10 the first time I watched it. But then on repeat viewings, it really came into place. And I think it's actually the best of the three, even though I think Shaun of the Dead is the most iconic and the most rewatchable. Best does not necessarily mean favourite, but I think The World's End is the best of the three. Okay, and final question. I've gotten to all of the questions that came in except for this one. And the question comes from... okay, ready? 3, 2, 1, go. Question comes from Milo, trademark, who says, where is the love? Well, I like to try and share the love, but I think when I think of that question, what comes to my mind is the song Under Pressure by Queen and David Bowie. And I'm reminded of the ending of that song, which I think is one of the best things that David Bowie's ever written, when Freddie Mercury asks, why can't we give love? He responds, because love's such an old-fashioned word, and love dares you to care for the people on the edge of the night, and love dares you to change our way of caring about ourselves. And I think it's one of the best lyrics ever written, those few lines, because what it's saying is that, in my interpretation, I'm going to go over 60 seconds, but I think it needs highlighting, because love is considered such an old-fashioned concept, and when you want to love somebody, it means that you're going to have to love people who you disagree with, people who you hate, in a sense, people who say things that you disagree with, people who it actually hurts you to love, people on the edge of the night, people who you might end up getting hurt or damaged with because of your love for them. And it also means that you may have to look at yourself and your imperfections and the things that you do wrong. Love dares you to change your way of caring about ourselves. We have to look at our flaws, and we have to still learn to love ourselves in spite of those flaws. And with love, it's easy to hate. That's the thing. Love is difficult. Love is taxing. Love is something that requires you to look at yourself, your imperfections and your flaws, and to try and improve on those, and to look, or at least to look past them, or look at people who you disagree with or have ideological differences with, and still appreciate and love and respect them anyway. And love is difficult. Love is hard. Love is old-fashioned. And to hate is easy. And that's one reason I think we're going through this whole depressing spell of stuff recently, because hating is easy. Hating and ignorance, it's an easy thing to do. It's an easy trap to fall into. Love is difficult. And where is the love? I don't know, but it's within all of us. But if we just bother to try, just listen to Under Pressure. That's all I'm saying. 2.5 minutes for what should have been a lightning round question, but I just love those last few lines of Under Pressure. So that's just what I immediately thought of when Milo asked, "Where is the love?" So yeah, David Bowie, we love you. It was a year ago. We love you. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. That was kind of a heavy ending to the Film Brits podcast. But anyway, thank you so much for listening to the Film Brits podcast. Massively appreciate your listenership, viewership, whatever you want to call it. If you'd like to see more of, or listen to more of this content, you can subscribe to me on SoundCloud or subscribe to me on iTunes at Film Brits. Sorry, I just burped. Or you can subscribe to me on YouTube if you like to listen to the podcast through there. You're also able to get to the podcast a day early if you pledge to me on Patreon. If you have to keep the lights on here at Trilby Reviews, help me to make this a full-time job. If you want more Doctor Who or video-related content or more stuff on my website or more podcasts and everything like that, because it'll be awesome to be able to do this full-time, and hopefully I might be able to do that one day. But today is not that day, depressingly. So thank you very much for listening to the Film Brits podcast. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at Trilby Reviews, or be sure to follow me on Facebook at Mr. TARDIS Views. I'm also doing the podcast, the Movie Mania podcast, every week. I didn't do it last week because I was, like I said earlier, I was at my girlfriend's family's birthdays and everything. My fiance's, sorry. New terminology, you got to get used to it. So thank you so much for listening to the podcast, and I shall see you guys next time.